From Milan to London, from New York to LA, the new brown shirts from the Red Green Alliance are on the march. I'm going to show you, and I'm going to tell you why, coming up on In Focus. Hi, welcome to another episode of In Focus. I want to start this show by showing you a couple of clips. The first clip we're going to look at right now is a bunch of anti-Semitic goons in Milan descending on a supermarket. Why are they descending on this supermarket, you ask? Why are they throwing rocks at it? Because it sells Israeli products. Here, let's cut to the next clip. The next clip is from New York. In this clip, you see a bunch of anti-Semitic goons attacking Jerry Seinfeld, calling him a Nazi and accusing him of genocide. The next clip we're going to see is from London. Here we see a bunch of anti-Semitic goons going after a Muslim-owned kebab shop. Why? Well, because the owner sells Coke products, obviously, and Coke sells its products in Israel, and therefore he's not allowed to anymore.
Shame on you! Shame on you! You have no shame on you! Shame on you! Shame on you! Come on! Are you gonna hit a woman? Are you gonna hit a woman? Are you gonna hit me now?
Finally, this clip you see is at the Beverly Hills Wilshire Hotel, known for being the place where Julia Roberts and Richard Gere got together in Pretty Woman. Well, yesterday they had a different event there. Nancy Pelosi, the former House Speaker, was giving an address at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel, and you had a bunch of anti-Semitic goons outside harassing everybody. Okay, and the last picture I want to show you is one of the results of all of these anti-Semitic goon squads operating throughout the Western world. We see here a picture of a man named Aaron Bushnell, maybe Jewish, I don't know. He's a soldier in the U.S. Air Force, and he burned himself to death outside of the Israeli embassy yesterday in Washington, claiming that Israel is committing genocide in Palestine. And now he's dead. My friend Israel Mehdad wrote, I think correctly on Twitter, the following. He said, "The cries, chants, and shouts claiming Israel commits genocide are false, maliciously so, but they convinced Aaron Bushnell to self-immolate and he died. They killed him, the pro-Palestine propaganda proponents." Mehdad is correct. He's correct. And the anti-Semitic mobs in the streets, on campuses, at the UN, in the ICJ, at the State Department, spreading all of the same slanders, they also murdered Bushnell because they are promoting a lie. They're promoting a murderous slander that accuses Jews of being Nazis, just like the anti-Semitic mob accused Jerry Seinfeld, of all people, of committing genocide and being a Nazi in New York City. They killed him, and they're not only killing him, they're destroying parliamentary democracy in Britain, for instance. I don't know if you guys saw, But there was a major event that happened at the British Parliament a couple of days ago when the Speaker of the House of Commons decided to hold a vote on calling for a ceasefire against the rules of the British Parliament in secret so that people wouldn't be killed by Islamist mobs if they voted against it. And, Konstantin Kisin, who has the trigonometry podcast, he wrote a comment on what happened in the British Parliament that went viral the other day. He wrote that I just want to read you an excerpt from. He wrote, "Yesterday, the British Parliament changed the way it operates because the Speaker was afraid that some parliamentarians would be murdered if they couldn't be seen to vote for a ceasefire in a war on the other side of the world. This isn't democracy. This is a country that is unwilling to live by its own rules in order to placate a violent mob. And efforts are already being made to sweep this reality under the carpet, as they did the murder of Sir David Amess. More on that in a second. We can't afford that. We have to be honest and admit it. We have a problem with Islamist extremism that requires immediate and drastic action. Appeasement won't work." He's not the only one who commented on this. I don't know if you remember, but when British author and all-around great guy Douglas Murray was on this program back in November, he talked about the execution of Member of Parliament David Amess in 2021 by a jihadist in his electoral district, and how his fellow parliamentarians just brushed it. They swept the fact that his murderer was an Islamic terrorist under the rug because they didn't want to deal with it because they were too scared of the fact that he had been murdered by an Islamist jihadist in his own district in London. And here, there are a couple of things. So the woman who replaced Amess in his parliamentary district in the south of England wrote an important article in the Daily Telegraph and London's Telegraph yesterday. Her name is Anna Firth, and her article's titled, "Nobody Wants to Admit the Scale of the Islamist Extremist Threat to Our Democracy." So, you could basically read any excerpt from Firth's article and get the point. I just want to read you a couple here. So she talks about how she's been intimidated in her own very far to the right, by British terms, district since October 7th. And this is what she says. "Shortly after the Hamas attacks on October 7th, I went to my local synagogue to express my sympathies to the South End Jewish community and to ask if I could do anything to help. I was welcomed warmly, and my offer to help was appreciated. I also have a mosque in my constituency, so a few weeks later, I reached out to see if I could do anything to support that, especially in terms of organizing humanitarian help for the innocent people of Gaza. I was invited inside and offered a seat before being surrounded by a number of men and one woman. She immediately started shouting, jabbing her finger in my face and demanding to know how many babies had to die to satisfy my bloodlust." So very similar to Jerry Seinfeld is accused of genocide, right? "My aide, who was with me, suggested that we leave. A few days later," she goes on, and this is the last paragraph I'll read. "A few days later, there was an anti-war in the Middle East march in Southend with dolls covered in fake blood scattered on the pavement under people holding placards saying, 'Anna Firth kills babies.' I was horrified. A police officer stood by and watched, but did nothing. When I saw Met Commander Sir Mark Rowley a week later in the Commons, he agreed that this was intimidation and explained that the police do have powers to intervene and stop people inciting violence like this. So why didn't they?" And the answer is because the police is afraid of being called racist, or because the police has been penetrated by Islamists. I don't remember if I talked about it on this program, but it's really notable that there was an article that was talking about the Labour Party under Keir Starmer's leadership. He's considered better than his predecessor, who is an anti-Semite, and Jeremy Corbyn. And so everybody thought, Keir Starmer, who very likely is going to be the next British prime minister, at least isn't an anti-Semite like Corbyn was. But he has a big anti-Semitic problem. They were talking in this article that I was reading about how there are these different districts where the members of parliament or the people who were running to be Labor members of parliament from two different districts had to be pushed away from the Labor Party because they were making openly anti-Jewish statements. And what was notable was that the person who wrote the article, I'm sorry, I can't attribute it because I don't remember where it was from, was explaining that the problem isn't so much the Labor parliamentarians or the Labor politicians, it's the constituents themselves. Because in one of the constituent districts, they were saying that if this anti-Semite from the Labor Party doesn't run because he's an anti-Semite and the party doesn't want to have anti-Semitic lawmakers in parliament, then he's going to be replaced by George Galloway. And some of you may remember his name, some of you not. George Galloway was an MP from this district in England, which is Muslim majority, back, I think, during the Second Lebanon War and earlier, so about 15 years ago. And he is an out-and-out Nazi type. I mean, he wants all the Jews dead. He banned Jews from entering his district. Like, that was his policy. They had a sign at the, on the road in the entrance to his parliamentary district saying no Jews allowed, something or words to that effect. And, he was one of the original and most outspoken leaders of the Boycott of Israel movement in Britain. He is a Jew hater through and through. He's aligned with all of the terrorist organizations, Hamas, Iran, etc. And so what the argument in the article that I read was saying was that, look, the problem is that Britain has been penetrated, it's been infiltrated, that you have very large swaths of British society that are Islamists, that hate Jews, and that vote on the basis of their anti-Semitism, that this is what moves them, this is what motivates them, much like Hamas motivates the Palestinians here in Judea and Samaria, in Gaza, and that's why 80 to 85% of Palestinians in Judea and Samaria and in Gaza support Hamas, because it is a jihadist organization, not because it fixes potholes. It doesn't do that. Not because it uses international aid money to turn Gaza into some beautiful, Singapore in the Levant. No, it doesn't. It turned it into Afghanistan with 500 miles of subterranean terror tunnels. All the same with, intermittent electricity. That's not, they like Hamas because it is jihadists and they are jihadists. And the same thing now that you see with this imported Muslim community in Britain that came in from outside. They're immigrants and they're bringing the same hatred to the West. So that's what they're facing in England. And now it's gotten to the point where they've been trying to appease it, sweep it under the rug, not mention the fact that Sir David Amess was assassinated because he was not supporting jihad, because he was pro-Israel. And of course, you have Mike Freer, who is the MP from the largely Jewish electoral district in London of Finchley and what's it called? Oh, we're terrible. I wrote it down. Finchley and Golders Green, of course. So Finchley and Golders Green, heavily Jewish district. And they have this member of parliament who's very pro-Israel, not Jewish. And he announced that he's resigning from parliament after his constituent office in his district was burned down by Islamists, and nobody's doing anything about it. And his family is terrified because they're getting death threats. And so he said, forget it. My family has to come first. And after they murdered David Amess, there's absolutely every reason to believe they're coming after me, which is why the British Parliament had this vote so that everybody could show how anti-Israel they were so that they won't be assassinated. And this is, of course, while they were projecting the genocidal slogan "From the River to the Sea" on Big Ben during the vote to make sure everybody understood that they were supposed to support the annihilation of Jews. And they're bombing or whatever. They're attacking a kebab store of their own guy because he sells Coca-Cola. So this is where the West is descending, and the obvious lesson here is that this is not just about the Jews. That they start with the Jews, but the purpose of the jihad is to subjugate and destroy Western civilization and transform it through Islamist imperialism into part of the Dar al-Islam of the Islamic world in the name of Muhammad, in the name of Allah, in the name of jihad, and to subjugate you by the sword. Theo Ben-Gvir was beheaded just as they beheaded our people in southern Israel on October 7th, because that's what you do. You subjugate, you terrorize. That, as Moti Kedar said on this show, that is a way of jihad. It's humiliation, it's subjugation, it's imperialist. And this is what we're seeing now in Milan and in New York and in Beverly Hills and in London and all over the Western world. And the thing is that you think that you can feed the beast by saying, well, we are opposed to Israel too. You limit arms sales to Israel. You accuse Israel of violence, of settler violence. You say you're opposed to Israeli settlements, et cetera, et cetera. You think that you can feed the beast and then it won't try to engorge itself on you. But there's nothing that you can do, because there's never enough that you can do. You have to join. You have to be George Galloway if you want to get along with these people. You actually have to support the genocide of Jewry, and if you don't, then you're going to be targeted sooner or later, just as Sir David Amess was, and just as Mike Freer was, and is leaving Parliament, is abandoning the democratic process because he sees that the Met Police in London are not going to stand up for him. And by the way, you can say the same thing about the British Prime Minister, right? He had a Home Secretary who is standing up to these jihadists who are marching through London calling for Israel's annihilation after the October 7th massacre, and he fired her. And then he brought in David Cameron, who's talking about unilateral British recognition of Palestinian statehood. So that's the same thing. You're seeing, appeasement at the highest levels of the British government. You're obviously seeing it in Washington, where it seems that there's another anti-Israel edict that comes out of the White House every single day. Yesterday, they were saying that they're going to they're thinking about sanctioning Israel's national security minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir. Why? Because, you just have to keep feeding the beast. You're so worried. You think that the only thing you have to worry about is Michigan. You don't have to worry about Pennsylvania. So you're so intent on feeding the beast of the Islamists in Michigan, the Rashida Tlaib Democrats, that you forget, about the moderate Democrats who are very pro-Israel. You forget about the Jewish Democrats who are pro-Israel in places in swing states like Pennsylvania or the suburbs of Atlanta, et cetera, et cetera. Why should you count them? Because they're not burning congressional offices. They're not intimidating and demoralizing young people into thinking that what they really have to do with their lives is burn themselves to death, because they've embraced and believe in a complete and utter and malicious lie and slander against the Jewish people that's being propagated by all of their betters in universities and campuses, and then with these anti-Semitic goon squads. And, I want to tell you that this isn't something that's limited to non-Jews. This is a problem that Jews suffer from as well. Because, for many, many years, the Israeli left, for political reasons and for ideological reasons, and the American Jewish establishment, for reasons of political convenience, social interests, and religious interests, were very quick to join the anti-Semites in delegitimizing what they call the bad Jews, right? The settler Jews, the Jews who live in Judea and Samaria or support Israeli sovereignty over Judea and Samaria, Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria, sovereignty, asserting, fully enforcing Israeli sovereignty throughout unified Jerusalem. All of these things that the Israeli right, the religious right, the nationalist right, whatever, in Israel has long supported, these were delegitimized by the Israeli left, by American liberals, and they were doing it to make a distinction between themselves, the good Jews, and then the bad Jews. And I have to tell you, we're continuing to see this throughout this war. So I was infuriated and deeply insulted, actually, a couple of weeks ago when an old friend, an American Jewish leader, I don't know if he wants me to mention his name, but whatever, told me, much to my shock, that AIPAC and the Anti-Defamation League and the American Jewish Committee and other major Jewish organizations in the United States, including the Reform Movement, which is less surprising, that they continue to support Palestinian statehood and a two-state solution. This is something that Israeli Jews have turned the corner on. Israeli Jews absolutely oppose it. Some polls, it depends on the question. It goes anywhere between over 90% to 2/3 of Israeli Jews absolutely oppose any sort of support for Palestinian statehood, conditional or complete or whatever, under any circumstances. And they don't support, they don't believe in the Palestinian leadership. They have no faith in the Palestinian leadership. And this goes not only to the right, but also to the left. You have, except for Meretz and Labor Party voters who continue to support Palestinian statehood, the majority of voters for every political party on the left in Israel and obviously on the right oppose to varying degrees Palestinian statehood. It's over 60% in Benny Gantz's party. It's over 50% in Yair Lapid's party. And then, in the national religious camp, it's 100% opposition among Likud members. I just saw a poll from direct polls that came out, I think in January, that said 96% of Likud voters, 94% of Shas voters. So this is basically in the margin of error for 100% as well. So everybody opposes Palestinian statehood except for Meretz, which didn't cross the threshold into Knesset because it represents so few people, in Labor, which is not going to pass the threshold in the next election. Their voters continue to support Palestinian statehood, but that's a very marginal force in Israeli society. But in the United States, all of the major American Jewish organizations on their website continues to say that they support a two-state solution. Now, why Israelis don't support a Palestinian state is fairly clear. I talked about this in my article that came out in JNS on Friday. And basically, it's because Gaza was the Palestinian state. They had a full sovereignty in Gaza since 2005. And again, they didn't turn it into Singapore, as Ariel Sharon and his advisor promised us they would. They turned it into Afghanistan and Nazi Germany, all rolled up into one. And October 7th was what happened as a result of Palestinian sovereignty. So the concept of giving Palestinian statehood in Judea and Samaria in the heart of Israel is just spitting distance from all of Israel's major metropolitan centers is insane. And that's why Israelis say no, because, obviously the people like myself who recognized how dangerous Palestinian statehood was, maybe forever, maybe certainly since the Palestinian Authority was established and immediately introduced us to the suicide bomber, whatever. But the residual support that they had on the left for Palestinian statehood dried up because of October 7th. And but that's not the case in America. And one of the articles that really kind of depressed me and actually infuriated me, I must say, is one that came out in Tablet magazine on February 14th. It was written by a Columbia assistant professor at the business school named Shai Davidai and his wife, Yarden Greenspan. And I've been very supportive, all of us have, of Shai Davidai since October 7th. Was the first we heard of him was because he very bravely stood up to the anti-Semitic goon squad at Columbia, my alma mater, which I'm absolutely repulsed with and don't want to have anything to do with because it's become a Nazi campus. But, Shai is there and he's Israeli, and he was rallying the Jewish students to stand up for Israel and to stand up to the mob at great cost. And he wrote this article in Tablet, which really has become sort of a showcase for left-wingers who have sobered up. Not so much right-wingers who were never wrong about these things, but very much for left-wing Jews who are awakening to reality. So this is what the article is titled, "What Happens When You Teach at Columbia and Reject Hamas." So the thing that offended me, that's the right word, is that Shai and his wife, Yarden, write as follows. As leftist liberal Zionists, we have always made a clear distinction between the people of Palestine and the inhumane terror organizations that falsely purport to speak in their name. Okay, so what are you going to do? This is what Joe Biden said 2 days ago on his Twitter account. He said that Hamas doesn't represent the Palestinians. This is the line that the Biden administration has been pushing since October 7th, that Hamas is some sort of alien group that came down from, planet Krypton and took over the poor Palestinians in Gaza against their wishes. And this is, of course, a total and complete lie. Hamas is an organic outcropping of a jihadist society. It was founded in 1988 by Ahmed Yassin, a sheikh in Gaza, who was very popular in Gaza. It is the Muslim Brotherhood branch of in so-called Palestine, right? And the Muslim Brotherhood is a Sunni jihadist movement that was founded in neighboring Egypt, which is the cultural mecca for Gaza, right? Which is next door, which is just sort of a little appendage of Egypt. And that was formed in 1928, and they called for world conquest in the name of Islam, in the name of jihad, and that included killing all the Jews. So Sheikh Ahmed Yassin, who founded Hamas in 1988 and put in their covenant a call for the annihilation of the Jewish people in Israel and around the world, he's a Gazan. This is Gaza. And not only Gaza, he's a Palestinian. And he is supported by the overwhelming, his message, his movement, Hamas, the jihadist movement, the Palestinian branch of the Muslim Brotherhood that was founded in Egypt 100 years ago. This is them. This is who they are. That is why Hamas doubled its support among Palestinians after October 7th, because it did what they wanted it to do. Again, as I said before, right, just as you see in Bradford and other Muslim majority areas in Britain, right, they came from Pakistan, they came from, Indonesia, where they came from, wherever, right? They moved to Britain, and instead of becoming British and immersing themselves in British culture and embracing the liberal democratic traditions of Great Britain, they brought the totalitarian Islamic imperialist jihadist views that they had learned in their home countries in Asia and in the Middle East to Britain, and now they're forcing them by the sword on an unwilling and very frightened British population. And here you're seeing that this is where it grew up, in Egypt, in Gaza, in Judea and Samaria. And that is why when Hamas murdered 1,200 or 1,400 Israelis and wounded thousands more, and took 246 Israelis hostage to Gaza, right? They increased their support level among Palestinians by 100%. They doubled it, okay? Because they did what people wanted them to do. So the first line already of this paragraph is factually incorrect and deliberately so. So he says, "We have always made a clear distinction between the people of Palestine and the inhumane terror organizations that falsely purport to speak in their name." Okay, you're wrong about that. And then they go on. "Our support for a two-state solution has never wavered, and to this day we remain staunchly opposed to Israel's occupation of the West Bank, refrain from buying products manufactured beyond the 1967 armistice lines, the 1949 armistice lines, but whatever, and protest any governmental policy that we see as oppressive or unjust. Surely we thought our seemingly liberal friends would see that we too deserve to be heard." So they're saying that the problem is that their fellow progressives hated them because they stood up against Hamas and what it did in southern Israel. That they called Kibbutz Be'eri, the far left Kibbutz Be'eri, and Nir Oz, and Kfar Aza. They're all populated by, people who vote for Meretz in the Labor Party that don't even cross the threshold in the Knesset and the votes in the polls today, or Meretz doesn't, Labor doesn't, whatever. Small, very far to the left communities. They called them settlements. The Hamas terrorists and the Gazan civilians who came over, the mob that joined them to join the slaughter, they referred to the kibbutzim there as settlements, no different from the settlements, right, in the occupied West Bank. From the Palestinians' perspective, there is literally no difference, none, between Be'eri, that was practically annihilated, and Efrat, where I live in Judea, in Gush Etzion. No difference at all. They don't see a difference between Caroline Glick and the families and my family and the families of Jews that they slaughtered in Be'eri. From their perspective, the Jewish state, the Jewish nation, is indivisible. But from the perspective of progressive Jews and from liberal Jewish perspective, it's not indivisible. They divide. They say, we're not like them. And you're supposed to like us because we don't like them. And then he says, this is what we got, or they say, this is what we got wrong. We failed to realize that for many in our progressive circle, being a liberal Israeli just wasn't good enough. If we had kept quiet, they might have been willing to accept us as equals. If we apologized for Israel's existence, they might have even given us some extra points. But exposing Hamas's atrocities and the support it was gaining among young Americans, naming the kidnapped children and begging the world to help bring them home, giving voice to the Israeli victims of mass rape by Hamas terrorists, for our friends, our refusal to apologize for Israel's existence simply deemed us intolerable. Their minds were already made up. They wouldn't even let us plead our case. And then they go on and say, it took us a while to understand it, but once we did, everything started making sense. Our friends did not have a problem with our politics. They had a problem with our identities. So here's the thing, right? You have a problem with your identity also, right? Because what you're saying is that we're the good Jews, and we continue to make a distinction. I mean, I hate to think about it, but I can't help myself. What would have happened if it hadn't been the Palestinian neighbors of Kibbutz Be'eri and Nir Oz and Kfar Aza that had come in and conducted a one-day Holocaust? But if it had been the Palestinian neighbors of Efrat and Neve Daniel and Elazar in Gush Etzion who had done it, would he have expressed the same outrage to the pro-Hamas mobs on Columbia campus if the people who had been slaughtered on Simchat Torah hadn't been people reveling at the Nova Music Festival, but had been people coming to Hebron to dance at the Cave of the Patriarchs in Simchat Torah? Would the outrage have been the same, or would they have thought that there's something basically legitimate about annihilating Jews that they themselves consider illegitimate? And look, it brings them to the same place anyway, right? Because Shai Davidai faces a very uncertain and very unpleasant future if he stays at Columbia, so that the administration, the anti-Semitic Nazi-like administration at Columbia, can pretend that it's not anti-Semitic by pointing to the Israeli that they haven't fired, but that they abuse, right? Because they'd do that to him anyway, because the hatred is the same no matter what, whether it's progressives who reject their identity. It's not their identity as progressive Jews or Israelis that they're rejecting. They reject their identity as Jews and as Israelis. That's what's being rejected here. It's the same thing for Jerry Seinfeld. Jerry Seinfeld isn't Israeli. I don't know what his politics are, but I doubt that he's a Trump supporter, right? I doubt that he's on the right. But he came to Israel with his family to show solidarity with the people of Israel after October 7th, and people really appreciated it. It was on TV. I think they were eating ice cream in Tel Aviv and his daughter, and I know it made me happy to see him here. He came, and now he's being accused of genocide back in New York because from the perspective of people accusing Jerry Seinfeld of genocide, there is no difference between him and Caroline Glick and my family that God should protect. And I look at this and I think to myself, this is why anti-Semitism keeps getting worse. This is why it's not going to get better. No matter who is president, probably, although that's not true. I think Trump is president will probably get better, especially if he brings David Friedman back to Israel. But be that as it may, I mean, it does start with the Jews, but it also, like, it starts with the Jews. The hatred starts with the Jews. They start off hating us, and then they go out and they go to Milan and they go to Bradford in London and they go to everywhere. They go to Timbuktu, and they burn anybody, who doesn't agree with their jihadist ways, right? I mean, they're certainly doing it against the poor Christians in Nigeria, but they do it against you because you didn't stand up for the Jews. But it starts with the Jews also in the sense that the Jews have to recognize that you have to recognize the legitimacy of Jews who you don't agree with politically. I mean, I can't imagine, I've never heard of, and would be shocked if I did, find out that there exist on the Israeli right people who thought it was justified for the Hamas terrorists to kill the leftists in the kibbutzim. There's no such person, to the best of my knowledge. Maybe there is. There are crazies everywhere. But this is not a sense that you ever hear expressed, ever. Because what the right understands is that even though we're in a big fight with the left on a whole lot of things, including the future of our control over Judea and Samaria, and whether it's important from a strategic perspective, whether it's important from a national perspective, whatever it's important from a religious perspective, we totally support it for many, many reasons, and they totally oppose it for a lot of reasons. First and foremost, that they want to be, loved by the progressives who are stomping on them right now. But we never denied the legitimacy of leftists who are saying this about us. We never denied the right to be alive. We never justified terrorism against them. We certainly never called for boycotts, domestic or international, of products from kibbutzim because they were kibbutzim. Never, at least not in an organized fashion. It doesn't happen. But on the left, it's different. I mean, they literally are saying here, Davidai and Greenspan, that they boycott products made by my neighbors in Efrat. That's what they do because they consider me to be illegitimate. That's what they're saying. He's like, you don't get it? What is it going to take for you to get it? What extra price are you going to pay that you haven't already paid at Columbia or at Harvard or at Stanford or wherever, at your Reform synagogue in your progressive neighborhood in Chicago? What extra price are you going to pay that you haven't paid already if you acknowledge the legitimacy of the Jews in Israel whose politics you oppose? Why does it have to be an existential delegitimization, dehumanization of the Israeli Jews who you oppose, that you boycott them? You boycott them. That's an extraordinary statement. Why? What price are you going to pay that you're not paying now if you accept the legitimacy of your political opponents, of your ideological opponents? And by the way, note that your own ideological camp no longer believes that we're illegitimate. Only you do, or very few of you do. Why? And the answer is, it's not what price you will pay. You're already paying the price. You want to live on the Upper West Side of New York. You want to teach at the, Bears State University on the Hudson River. Go ahead. Do whatever you want to do. But so long as progressive Jews, Israelis in America, Americans in America, continue to pretend or accept that there's a distinction between legitimate Jews and illegitimate Jews, they're not going to hurt the anti-Semites. They're not going to weaken the cause of the anti-Semites. They're weakening their ability to fight them. Because if at the outset you said, oh, yes, it's absolutely correct to give sovereignty to a society that's organized solely around the principle of jihad and the annihilation of my people, right? Then you're saying that, there's something morally wrong about your people. that you must have done something to deserve it, that it's your fault. And if it's your fault, then you can't defend against people who are attacking kebab stores because they sell Coca-Cola products. You can't stand up. You can't stand up, and you won't stand up, at least not effectively, against people who are busting up a Barry Weiss who probably hates Judea and Samaria as much as Shai Davidai does, right? They're busting up her talk that she's pro-genocide because she thinks that it's wrong to rape Israeli women, right? They're busting up all over the place. But until these people, these wonderful Jews who are finally waking up, and by the way, these are the same progressive Jews who did nothing for 4 years, right? As you saw this rising wave of violence against ultra-Orthodox Jews in places like Borough Park and Muncie, because it didn't happen to Jews who looked like them, right? They stood back and they said that the real problem with anti-Semitism in America and the ADL, right, is the white nationalist anti-Semites, not the black anti-Semites, the Hispanic anti-Semites, the Islamist anti-Semites that are carrying out pogroms in Borough Park. They're not a problem. The problem is Charlottesville, right? And that's all you wanted to look at until it started smacking your kids in the face at Columbia. But still, you have to see that the Jews of Borough Park, the Jews of Efrat, the Jews of Los Angeles, of Beverly Hills, of the Upper West Side, of New York, and of Tel Aviv, and of Beirut are all one people in the eyes of our enemies, and we have to be as well in our own eyes. Because so long as you have this very outspoken, with a big microphone, contingent of progressive and liberal Jews who continue to support Palestinian statehood, even though they have to understand by now that a Palestinian state means the genocide of Jews, and so long as they continue to make a distinction and say that they boycott settlement products, and that they're opposed to the occupation, as if they have a better alternative that's going to protect the people of Tel Aviv, right? Just for that reason. They're not going to be able to really fight anti-Semitism because they're giving legitimacy to a group of people, to a cause, which isn't Palestinian nationalism. It's jihad. They're enabling, empowering, and legitimizing jihad. So you legitimize jihad, or you accept the legitimacy of Jews who you disagree with. Not Jews who want to kill you, not Jews who want to shout you down, not Jews who want to get you fired, not Jews who are threatening your kids. No, just Jews who disagree with you about the path of Israel. You're either legitimizing the mob, the anti-Semitic goon squads accusing you of genocide, or you're legitimizing Jews who you disagree with. And it's so strange that you still, so many, I don't want to personalize it to Shai Davidai, because again, you have been fighting a heroic battle, right? But it's not enough. Because if you continue, if American Jews, if Israeli Jews in the United States continue to think that it's right to reject the legitimacy of Israelis who you disagree with, then you are legitimizing jihad. And when you legitimize jihad, you endanger not only yourselves, you endanger all of us. Anyway, so from attacking a grocery store that sells products probably from Kibbutz Yad Mordechai in Milan to Jews who attack other Jews because they don't agree with them and boycott them. This is where we've come to. You cannot pretend that it's possible to pick and choose which victims are acceptable and which aren't. Hate is unacceptable. Jihad is a global menace to Jews, to Jewish life, to the existence of the Jews, and, as they saw in the British Parliament, to the existence of freedom in the West. Those are my thoughts for this week, and I'll talk to you again later. We're going to have some more interesting shows you'll see this week coming up. So stay on this space. Take care. Bye-bye.